everyone, and welcome to this week's Neurodivergence at Work Q&A. I'm here again, usually here on a Tuesday at 1:30 for 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, just to answer your questions about neurodivergence at work and how neurodivergence can show up in workplace settings. Neurodivergence referring to autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and co-diagnosis, so multiple diagnosis, as many neurodivergent people have more than one neurotype. My name's Kate Isiche, and I'm a neuro inclusion consultant. I have about 20 years experience working in communications in leadership roles. I've been a consultant for the past 7 years, and latterly focused on neuro inclusion, and supporting organizations and managers in particular to understand neurodivergence and how to help neurodivergent employees and, in fact, teams, because every team is neurodiverse, to be productive and efficient and to become high performing, with a manager who understands how to harness the skills of a neurodiverse team profile. So about 15 to 20% of people are neurodivergent. Obviously, not everyone has a job, because many autistic people are not employed, about 70 to 80%, but the vast majority of people have ADHD, and there are, as I said earlier, co-diagnoses. So I come online every Tuesday on LinkedIn to answer your questions and have a conversation. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today, the main thing I wanted to talk to you about today and answer questions on, is managers with neurodivergence. So I myself am an undiagnosed ADHDer, um, self-diagnosed through my children's diagnosis. And I have, as I said earlier, had 20 years experience working in corporate settings, in leadership roles, in communications. So head of internal comms, head of EMEA internal comms, head of global internal comms, head of comms, external and internal. And I've run many change and transformation projects for global complex organizations. And global organizations are my comfort zone. I love working across cultures and across languages. So I've got a lot of experience, and it's really difficult sometimes to be able to fit into an organization, even when you're neurotypical, because there is no such thing really. Everyone is neurodiverse in their own unique way. But if you're neurodivergent, then you have a specific neurotype. And for many ADHDers, they find coping mechanisms to manage their working day around time management, organization, prioritization, and just using that hyperfocus to its best advantage, rather than becoming overwhelmed and consumed by one particular thing and drilling down too much at the expense of everything else. And this is very common in autistic and ADHD profiles. So if you are a neurodivergent manager yourself, one of the things that I've come online today is to ask questions from you, and to get questions back about neurodivergence and how it impacts your working life. So often when you talk about neurodivergence, when people talk about neurodivergence, they talk about it from the perspective of the manager being neurotypical and the team member or the employee being neurodivergent, being dyspraxic, dyslexic, autistic, etc. But why should it always be that way? Many times I would imagine that there are managers who are themselves neurodivergent, who may also be leading teams with neurodivergent employees, or leading teams with a mixture of both neurotypical and neurodivergent, so a neurodiverse team. And I think most teams come under that category of being neurodiverse, a mixture of the two, with the majority obviously being neurotypical or not neurodivergent. So for a manager who themselves could be struggling with their own neurodivergence, or finding ways, coping mechanisms to get through their working day, how does that then align with being a manager, number one, so supporting your team as a whole, and then supporting your neurodivergent employees or team members. And it's really easy to think about, this homogenous group, but I think you've probably heard me say this before, and lots of other people in my line of business say the same thing. You've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I do struggle with the term neurodivergent because again, that does speak to a generic approach, a generic label, which encourages everyone to think, well, everyone's the same who's neurodivergent, and that simply isn't the case. It's a shortcut, I suppose, a way of addressing that whole collective group of neurotypes in a simple way, rather than having to say dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. There are so many different neurotypes, and they are very different, but there are also some similarities. So neurodivergence captures those similarities, I suppose. But I think it's worth remembering during these conversations that neurodivergence is different depending on the individual, the experiences, the backgrounds, the individual's culture and upbringing and education. So much of that is impacted, um, you know, by 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 the neurodivergence and vice versa. So if you are a manager, you've reached a senior level in an organization, when you're neurodivergent, the likelihood is that you found coping mechanisms that work for you. So for me, I like to prioritize using a lot of written notes. I use reminders to support my prioritization. Very simple interventions like to do lists, nothing particularly fancy. The phone is my best friend, my iPhone, a picture of my daughter, is my best friend because it has those reminders, it has notes, it has voice memos. Voice memos are a killer app for me, which is inbuilt to the iPhone. You don't need to download it or anything else. I mean, I'm sure there are downloadable versions, but there's one built into every phone, I believe. Certainly the iPhones have a voice memo app built into it. And I just use that on the go, to record some of the thoughts that I'm having, to reprioritize, to look at some of the thoughts that I'm having around my working schedule, and the priorities and tasks and projects that I've got on my table. And it can help to, if you listen back to those voice notes, to reflect back to you what is less important and what is more important. One of the key facets of ADHD is that overwhelm, because often you get drilled down into one particular passion project, and then you try to juggle multiple balls in the air. So it's quite often, for ADHDers to believe they're great at multitasking. And they say, don't they, there's no such thing as multitasking. You're just doing a lot of things, one thing after the next, rather than in parallel, because of course you're only one person and you can't do things in parallel. You can just do things, one thing, and then you do another, but it looks like you're doing it in parallel because you're coordinating and you're managing a lot of things. So I love voice memos, I love notes, I love reminders, and I love the alarms. I've got about 10 alarms. I know people have way more than that, for different things. And it just helps me to prioritize, and to remember, because there's always too much going on, always overload my schedule with way too many tasks, and allow people to take my time. That's one of the things that is very common for people with ADHD. They tend to want to please other people, and so therefore say yes a lot, even when they don't have the capacity to do so. So it's often, a thing where your schedule, if you do have ADHD, to be completely overwhelmed with appointments, and meetings, workshops, training sessions, whatever it may be. You have this ambition to do lots and lots of things, but actually not many of them are that important or crucial in order for you to make progress. So it's that prioritization piece which is so key for many ADHDers. And for people with autism, I know that organization can be a challenge. Interacting socially, it can be different, the experience of that. So often it's quite common for neurodivergent people, autistic people in particular, to want to work as individuals. And if you're a team leader rather, and you have a team of employees, five or six or three or four, there's that collaboration which is necessary, frequent collaboration and co-creation. And also, discussion to be able to assign tasks in a way that everyone feels comfortable with, to understand your team members, to get to know them as individuals, and therefore, run projects and programs that are going to be successful because you know how everyone works and how everyone works best. And then aligning that need with your own individual needs, and perhaps discomfort around social interactions and communication. So it's using the full suite of communication channels available to you, be it a chat tool, be it audio, a phone call. I know for me, I love phone calls, and I know a lot of neurodivergent people feel comfortable with phone calls because they don't have to see the other person. I think we've sort of downplayed phone calls quite a lot with the advent of text and WhatsApp and Snapchat and voice memos too. So there's this sort of asynchronous approach which I think works really well for some neurodivergent people. But that you get the synchronicity with a phone call because you're both talking to each other at the same time, you're asking questions, you're answering the questions, there's back and forth, and it's happening in parallel at the same moment. So you get that understanding, which is immediate, without the need to have your camera on and to look a particular way and to, have someone's eyes look into your own eyes, which I know some neurodivergent people actually not just only find uncomfortable, but can sometimes find painful. So that ability to be able to use the full suite of communication channels is really important if you're a manager, as well as being a team member who is neurodivergent. And it's so important if you are a manager to be able to have that ability to interact really well with your team members. But that doesn't necessarily have to focus on face to face. Yes, face to face is rich. It's the most detailed communication method you can have because it's real time. You're seeing them, they're seeing you, they can see your body language, they can see your facial expressions, they can feel your mood, and therefore they can, interpret what you're saying in an accurate way, and respond accordingly. But again, then again, it's also a lot of work for someone sensory, features, having that overload of a lot of, listening and a lot of visual contact is hard for some people. But it is rich and it does work, but not for everyone. So having, to use different methods to create a similar effect is one of the ways that I have found works really well. So a combination of chats, a combination of audio, a combination of written communication like email, combining all of those things, text messages, etc., really provides that holistic approach towards communication, which can sometimes be better than just focusing on one thing, even if it is very rich, like face to face communication. So, communication is key, particularly if you're a manager and you have a team. How do you find ways to interact with them that aligns with their needs as well as meeting your own? And bearing in mind that if you do have a neurodiverse team, which you will have, there will be neurotypical people there who will possibly favour, because they have their own preferences too. It's not as if it's just the domain of neurodivergent, autistic, or people with dyspraxia or dyslexia, to be able to just favour that verbal communication or face to face communication. I know for many dyslexic people, written communication is hard. Email is a tough one because of the focus on the words and the order of the letters, and the reading. But there are other ways that you can make that more palatable, around formatting and structure. So I know when I receive an email, and I'm not dyslexic, I get really put off when it's just streams and streams and streams and lines and lines and lines of text. I really struggle with that. But when you have bullets, you have paragraph breaks, it's just so much cleaner. And of course, using visuals, of course, using, graphics and infographics, which is a combination of visuals and text and information like data and numbers, is really key. So there are always ways that you can interact with your team, provide information, support them, and interact with them in a way that aligns with both the needs of a neurodivergent manager and neurodivergent or neurodiverse or neurotypical team members. So I'm here every week at 1:30 p.m. UK time, LinkedIn, for your questions. If you're watching this on playback, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. You can reach out to me if you want to ask a question about my services, my coaching. I coach neurodivergent employees, professionals, as well as neurotypical managers to be able to understand their neurodivergent team members. You can reach out to me at katesiche at wheretolookcoms.co.uk, or you can DM me on LinkedIn at katesiche. That's ISICHEI. And you can also visit my website to find out more about my program. I have a training program which is all online, available 24/7, and that's at wheretolookcoms.co.uk. So thank you for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. If not, I'll be back online next week. Thank you.